Guys, I got 7 o'clock. We're going to start. Um, this will be on the Visa page later, so everyone can watch this later. So I'm Captain Mike. I got Captain Cole here. We're going to talk about Cobia today. But I want to first talk about what's going to happen a week from today at VMRC, downtown Newport News. That's when our Cobia season is going to be set by the commissioners there. And just yesterday, BMRC got a brand new commissioner, Colonel Steve Bowman. John Bull is out. Colonel Bowman is in. And so we got a new commissioner. He's a chairman of the board of the associate commissioners. And so we're hoping Colonel Bowman is fair and treats us all well. So next week was going to happen Tuesday, sometime after lunch. The reason I hate these meetings is you never know exactly when your item's going to come up on the agenda. They just roll from one agenda item to the next. So Cobia is going to be sometime in the afternoon, sometime after lunch. I'm going to guess around 2:30, 3 o'clock time frame it'll start, but that's just a guess. What we need is as many anglers as possible to show up and sound off. There's 7 options being considered. You can go to the Visa homepage, look up Cobia, and you'll see the 7 options. We're currently running a poll on the Visa page, and it's just join VSSA.org, and you can vote for the option you like the best. And we got over 650 people voting so far, and we're going to take that poll results and represent that to the commissioners as kind of the Visa position on Cobia. The options this year don't really seem that bad. We're talking either 3 fish or 4 fish, all 40 inches or above. And the question becomes then whether we're going to have 3 fish per boat or 4 fish per boat, and then exactly what our season is. So they run from 15 May through 30 September, and there's various options on those. So whatever option we get, it's not going to be terrible. The other thing we're pushing is we want our damn gaff back. And so we're going to push the commissioners hard to these guys. They think that it's some sort of conservation measure, and it is not. There's no data to support whether gaffing a cobia or not gaffing a cobia hurts or helps the population at all. And we've been told 1,000 times we use the best available science. There is no science available that tells us about the gaff, whether it hurts or helps. So we want our gaff back. So that question, we're going to try to convince them to give us our gaff back. The third question is out of those 3 or 4 fish over 40 inches to keep, should one of them be over 50 inches or not? Only one be over 50 inches that you keep. On the conservation side, the one over 50 inches is setting kind of a conservation measure that we're trying to protect the spawning females. So the spawning females are out there. They come into the Chesapeake Bay to spawn, and the big breeders are the females, and they're the ones over 50 inches a lot of times. So if we kill too many of them, we're hurting the spawn. But what Atlantic States and Marine Fisheries Commission has set for us with our options, they don't discuss, the one over 50 at all. So if we do that within Virginia, we don't get any credit for it. So that's something, but I'm not telling anyone how to vote or what comments to make. If you are conservation minded, then you tell the commissioners that you want to vote only one of those 3 or 4 fish should be over 50. If you feel strongly that just give us 3 or 4 fish and that's enough, then say that. We're not trying to sway your mind or anything. We want you to make up your own mind. But what we need are you to show up and give your comments. If you can't show up, then send them in. And we'll have later this week on the Visa page on how to get the comments in.
I believe, speaking to West Blow, he tagged me in something on Facebook. I believe that the Cobia is either Amendment 12 or Amendment 15 in that range, so it should be shortly after they break for lunch.
All right, why am I lagging?
Click the video itself.
No, it's on my screen. It looks like it's frozen. So you guys, somebody give me a thumbs up if we're still putting out okay uh, on Facebook before we really get started. Because it looks like on my screen it's kind of frozen up. Uh,
Looks like you're moving again.
okay, so let's keep going, guys. Maybe it's just my slow ass computer here. So, so I'm doing this on my cell phone now versus my camera because last time we had problems. So anyways, that's what was happening with Cobia. It's going to happen Tuesday next week on the 27th. So that's a week from today. Show up or send in your comments. We'd appreciate it. So without further ado, we're going to talk about Cobia fishing. Because before we know it, spring is freaking tomorrow, believe it or not, even though it's not going to feel like it. We're talking about snow. But it won't be long and Cobia will be here. And we'll be fishing for Cobia. So we got Captain Cole here from, what's your boat name again?
Big Deal.
Big Deal Fishing. And he fishes out of Mathews, Virginia.
Correct.
And so he's a little bit north of us, where I am here. So we're going to start off talking about, talk about chumming first. So give us kind of a brief overview of how you like to chum for cobia.
Well, we have a variety of different ways that we like to chum for cobia. My favorite thing to do is just find myself a nice ledge of anywhere of like a 3 to 4 foot difference in height, drop my anchor up on top of the ledge, sit right in the middle of it, and put down one chum pot. I normally like to have it towards the front side of my spread, about midship. And I like to let my chum soak for a little bit, get it softened up, get the flow going before I drop any lines. So if there is any fish down there, I like to get them comfortable around the boat before I try to spook them and throw in lines instantly right away. Sometimes that has an adverse effect on fish, and that's a personal thing that I like to do. And I try not to keep it too clustered. Don't like to fish. I'm not one of those guys that'll fish 10 or 12 rods at a time. If I'm going to catch a fish, I'm going to catch it with anywhere from a 4 to 6 rod spread. Pretty simple setup. I either use pyramid weights or heavy round weights, anywhere from 6 to 8 ounces, all depending on current. If I'm having a hard time holding the bottom with a 6 ounce weight, I'll bump it up to an 8 ounce weight. And if the 8 ounce round weight isn't going to hold it, I'll use the 6 ounce pyramid. Normally those tend to grab a little better. Hook size, you don't ever want to go too big. I try to match my hook to my bait. So if I've got a big fat eel on there, I'll put on a big 9/0 hook. I like to use circle hooks when I chum, mostly because it doesn't gut hook the fish. It's more for me, so that way, if it is a short fish and he does decide to come along and eat the big eel, then all of a sudden it doesn't become an issue for me. Well, dang, I just killed that fish. It's all about conservation. If that fish isn't going to make the legal limits, then I want to have the ability to get the hook out of the corner of his mouth, easy, no problem, not hurt him because the hook went down to his gut. Right. I didn't get to it fast enough.
So when you're chumming and you've got your live bait out there,
right?
Do you like to have the rod kind of in free spool so let him run, or do you have it set at a certain kind of drag? What's your preference there?
I have a couple of different kinds of reels that I use. When I'm using conventional reels with just a straight in gear or free spool, I like to leave it in free spool with the clicker on.
Clicker on, yeah.
So that way when that fish takes it, he doesn't really feel the pressure from that line on there. He'll be able to, eat the eel and just swim away with it. And of course he'll feel a little bit of line pressure, but the goal for me and for any of you that are beginners out there is to make sure there's as minimal pressure on that fish as possible. Make it feel as natural as possible.
So I'm assuming you like a fish finder rig where the sinker stays placed, but the bait keeps going, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'm a huge fan of a fish finder rig. For cobia, I'm okay with if I can have the weight out with a 20-foot leader beyond the hook or beyond the weight. Excuse me. That's totally okay.
So a circle hook, and you're gonna let him run. About how long do you like to let him run?
It depends. That's all based off the fish. So if it's a big aggressive hit and he's just taking it, I'll give him anywhere from 4 to 6 seconds. With that circle hook, let him really go. But if he's a slow bite and he just sits there and you can see the end of the rod tip just getting chomped on, and you just see it shaking, and it slowly starts going out, I'll give it about 8 to 10 seconds. Really let him get that bait in his mouth, because it's, if I've got a small piece of just a little piece of bunker on there, well, I can almost pick that rod up right away, count to 4, and just close it and start reeling. and that hook's going to sit right there in that corner of his mouth. If you've got a live bait, sometimes like croaker or some sort of live bluefish or whatever anybody likes to use, you want to let him really get that fish in his mouth, because sometimes with a live bait, a cobia will sit there and hold it before he actually starts to eat it. And that's something that I like to do. So if I've got a nice live bait on there, I'm going to give him at least a minimum of 6 seconds before I close that drag and put pressure on.
Okay. You ever have a case where they just take like half the eel, they don't have the hook out, and they make that initial run with that, and then they stop and now they eat it?
Yes.
I've had that sometimes. So I've always torn between, do I set the hook early with a circle hook, or do I let him just have it for a while before I decide to set that hook? That's one you got to learn trial and error
Right.
on how you do that.
I feel that that's mostly just a personal thing. If a lot of people have great success where as soon as that fish picks that bait up, setting that hook almost instantaneously under 3 seconds. A lot of my friends, a lot of other captains I know, they do that, and it works for them a lot of the times. I'm one of those types of people, like I said, a personal opinion, that I like to let him eat it a little bit, give him at least a good 4 to 6 seconds before I even think about touching that rod.
Because on one hand, if you let them eat it too long, they may figure out, hey, something ain't right here. They're tasting that hook or something ain't right, and then they're going to spit it out.
Right.
So if you wait too long, then you've lost your window. All right, so do you try to keep rods out to maybe get a double, or do you clear everything when you get a bite?
It all is based off of which direction the fish runs. So when I come tight on that fish and I see if he's coming up and going left, and I've got 2 rods over here in the immediate area, if he's way out there, and that's part of the reason why I like to let him run a lot, I'm able to take 1 rod out of a rod holder and move it while I have my customer or I have my mate, whatever we're doing that day, fighting that fish. I like to try to clear the ones that are going to be, I think, hazard lines that could get tangled up and, have the potential of cutting off our fish. But if it's something that's close to the boat and it's not in the way of that fish being caught, then I try to leave it in the water, because where there's 1 cobia, there's at least 4. That's just a rule of thumb that I've always followed.
Yeah, or at least 2, I found. Because a lot of times I found that when they're swimming on the bottom like that, they're in pairs. Usually the mama and some followers or something.
That's right.
I always try to hook the big one, the mama.
That's the goal every time.
But sometimes I get the rat, and then I see the mama swimming away, like, oh, the wrong one. Well, okay, let's talk about the early season bite.
Okay.
And maybe locations.
Well, the early season bite is a hit or miss bite.
Really? My cell phone's gonna ring. Don't worry about it.
Well, the early season bite, like I said, it's a hit or miss deal. Excuse me. But locations are a lot of popular spots. One of them is York Spit. You want me to wait for that?
All right, somebody's saying the video stopped.
I can wait.
All right, hold on.
I can hear it on our videos too.
I got one person says the video stopped. I'm still getting video on my end here. That was my cell phone ringing. But I just want to make sure we're still putting out. It looks like we are. All right, let's just keep going. So sometimes the video
works.
So maybe the problem's on the other end, and not necessarily on our end. So
right.
I mean, this live stuff is kind of tough. But I'm at my house. I got 100 megabits per second, and I got a brand new cell phone. So I mean, I'm trying to eliminate all the technology challenges. So basically, the fish come in the western side of the bay first for chumming, right?
Correct.
So we got a map behind us here. If you want to have maybe a chart,
That's it.
not a map. Map is for land, charts for water.
Maybe don't listen to this.
See, but I'm Army, so I can say that. All right, so here's Cape Henry, Eastern Shore, Hampton, Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel. So, what are some of your early spots for chumming? You like to set up?
A popular early spot that I like to set up is over here, off of Bluefish Rock area, and this is your Hampton area right here. Messick Point is right over here, back in this area. So for those that have boats and have the ability to put in at the water, a good spot I would suggest that you put in would be at Messick Point Boat Ramp. And when you come out of Messick Point, you're going to take the channel out to your right. And if you look on a schematical chart, if you look at it, you will see on your chart, if you have the GPS capability on your computer or on your chart plotter, excuse me, you'll see what look like these fingers right here. And they're in about anywhere from 15 to 18 foot of water, and it's going to be a rise up about a 3 or 4 foot difference on the hills beside it.
You're talking about Bluefish Rock.
Correct. It's a Bluefish Rock area. And there's a Bluefish Rock Reef, which is a little bit further down. But one of my favorite spots to fish is, believe it or not, early season, the Fingers. Now, it's a very popular area. A lot of people fish there. And, you know, where there's one cobia, like we discussed before, there's at least 2. There could be at least 4. When they're there, they're there. And there's a good chance that if you go there and you set your chum down on the bottom and you're patient, you will catch a fish that day.
How long do you sit in one spot with chum, or do you grow impatient and pick up and move?
You know, it really depends on how much time I have. If I'm on a time constraint with my charters, believe it or not, I'll unfortunately have to say, hey, I'm going to make a decision. We're going to go back a little closer to home, go to an area that's closer to the marina, would give us more time to fish. But with chum, I normally don't leave my chum slick for at least an hour. I stay there for 1 hour solid, because if the fish aren't going to come in after an hour, they won't come at all for me. So I'm going to stay there for a minimum of an hour. I'm going to have baits out, and sometimes that means I got to fight through sharks. And if I have to fight through sharks, then I might stick around a little longer because I'm bringing fish in, and where there's sharks, there's cobia. When there's that little lull in the shark bite, every once in a while, you'll notice there's that cobia bite. If you stop catching sharks all of a sudden, and all your rods just start going slack for a minute, you're going to wait. Something bigger's around. It's either a really big shark or a good-sized cobia.
So talk about as we get into like beginning of June, into late June, do you like to move up a little more north?
I do. When I'm in the June area, I like to work my way up to York Spit area, which is when you come out of the York River. It is right over here in this general area. You'll notice on your chart when you're looking at it, it's in the landmass subsurface is in the shape of a triangle almost, and at the bottom part, it'll be anywhere from 15 to 18 foot, and at the top part, right next to the old light, which is a relic at this point, it'll be anywhere from 10 to 14 foot.
There's usually a lot of boats around there.
And there's a large amount of boats there, absolutely. The further the summer goes, though, the deeper I like to get. As the water gets hotter, I like to get deeper. As the water's colder, I stay a little shallower. So like late season or July and even August, I'm moving out to that 18 to almost 20 foot mark.
Okay. So, but basically, you're looking for drop-offs and channel edges, and so about what depth do you like to pick? Do you have like a common depth, like 15, 10, 20? Again,
that's all seasonal. The earlier the season, I like to go shallow, but a good depth for me year-round that I can consistently catch fish at is about 16 foot. If I'm, between 16 foot, 18 foot is pushing it, but late season in August, 18 foot can be a very productive spot, especially when that water is real hot and the thermocline in the water gets really low.
So you got your anchor out, you're chumming, you got your chum slick going. Do you use all eels, or do you mix eels with croaker or any other kind of baits, or you?
Well, it's a good question there. I like to use eels on at least 2 of my rods. My normal chum spread, like I said, will vary between 4 and 6 rods. I always keep 1 rod on the surface, way behind the boat, with a live croaker. I like that croaker swimming around, suspended off the bottom, about 5 or 6 foot below the surface on a bobber.
Yeah.
So that way, those fish that are in the chum slick but are up top still have the potential to see that fish and come down and eat it. Do
you ever put an oil drip out?
I do. A lot of people use Menhaden oil. You can buy the Tournament Strike Menhaden oil. Grafton Fishing Supply sells it. Bishop sells it. Wilcox sells it. A lot of popular places. I think even Bass Pro Shop sells it.
Yeah. It's very expensive though.
It's not cheap. For those of you that don't want to put out a Menhaden oil drip, another popular thing to do is, believe it or not, when I make my own chum, which is something that I like to do, I actually, believe it or not, I'll use canola oil because it has the same concept. It grabs the essence of the Menhaden itself, and you can spread it out. And it's a heck of a lot cheaper to buy a bottle of canola oil than it is to buy a bottle of Menhaden oil.
Yeah, so you got a chum slick going, and sometimes if you can afford it, buy the oil. Do you ever like chunk Menhaden chunks out?
It's not something that I've done before. I use a Menhaden chunk as one of my hook baits. As one of my hook baits. Okay. So I'll use a combination of eels. If I can catch a couple of live croaker that morning, I'll use a couple of live croaker. Um, I'll use a combination of eels that and a nice piece of bunker chunk about the size of a half an index card.
Yeah.
Is normally a good rule of thumb for what I like to use. I
About
don't
half
want
a
to use
bunker probably.
exactly.
Cut the bunker in half.
Yep, that's it. And you don't want to leave the tail on there because if you put the tail on there, it's just going to spin in a circle
Yeah,
and tangle up your leader and foul up your line. It won't look natural.
that's right. Because fish don't swim that way.
That's right. Fish don't swim like a helicopter.
That's right. So all right, so that's chumming. Anything else you want to cover about the chumming operation that you like?
You know, a lot of people don't realize it, but cobia are a creature of habit, and they're pretty predictable when it comes to what areas that they can be in and what areas they've historically showed up in. And for those that aren't that well versed in cobia, my best suggestion to you is if there's nothing else that you learn from this, remember, find a ledge, put a chum pot on the bottom, and make sure that as your boat goes up and down with it, I like to leave my chum about a foot off the bottom. So if there's any waves that day at all, when it comes up, it hits the bottom, kicks up a little sand, spits out a little more chum.
And that keeps the chum pot moving and dispensing chum.
Exactly.
And as the water temperatures goes up, that chum brick doesn't last very long.
No, it does not. No, it does not. But there is one other thing you should know about chumming as well. The middle of the tide is not a good time to chum. If you're smack dab between high tide and low tide, or low tide and high tide, to me that is not my favorite time to chum. I'll go sight fish for a couple hours. If I've got a customer that's adamant on chumming, I'll wait.
Like the beginning of a tide cycle?
Beginning of a tide cycle or the end of a tide cycle. Anytime when that last 2 to 2.5 hours before the tide changes is perfect time. From there to the tide change.
You don't like the max current where it's moving the fastest?
You know, I'm not a big fan of it because for me, it dispenses your chum a lot, and I think that you get less bites that way. I notice I've caught more sharks in the middle of the tide bite, and I caught more cobia as the tide slows down.
Okay. But definitely, if you're there at slack tide, go sight casting, right?
Oh, yeah. If you're there at slack tide and there's no tide moving at all, you could sit there and wait it out. But
because your chum's not moving anywhere. It's
no,
just sitting there.
It sits there and you catch as many stingrays as you could possibly want.
Yeah.
Now, if you like to catch bullnose rays, by all means, go ahead. It's not for me.
So I think you just answered Curtis's question about what's your favorite tide. So he just talked about the beginning of the tide or towards the end. But the middle of the max or slack tide is what he's saying he doesn't like as much.
That's right, the permits too.
So I'll talk about that at the end. Well, let's shift gears and talk about sight casting because, I mean, I used to chum exclusively a lot, and it can be just downright boring if you're not getting the bites. So a lot of people don't like sitting on anchor and wait for the fish to come to the boat. A lot of people like, because we're hunters by nature. If we're fishermen, we're normally hunters too. So if you're sight casting, you're hunting. You're actively doing something. And so a lot of people like that. Just the active, it's more active fishing because you're constantly on the way, you're searching. Everybody on the boat who has a pair of eyeballs is looking for cobia. So let's just give me a kind of brief overview of your sight casting operation.
Sure.
Firstly, if you need a tower, you should have a tower.
Absolutely.
Be up high, right? So
absolutely. I don't suggest having a ladder. It is not a safe thing to do. Now, that was the old school way. But my sight casting operation, I like to keep everything as simple as possible. If you have too many rods up top with you, I find that they just get in the way. It doesn't make it very conducive to where if you do see a fish behind you, you can quick throw him back there if he's moving quick the other direction. I keep it simple. I like to have one live bait with me, one bucktail, and one form of other bait in the form of like a Ronzi is a popular bait. For those that don't know, it's like an imitation eel, but it has an arrowhead on it to where it gets very sporadic, left, right, up, down.
Okay.
There's no pattern to that bait. And it's all based off of the beholder. When you're sight fishing, a couple of the main points that people should, especially those that are just learning and want to go catch fish, is you want the glare to be your friend, not your enemy. It's always hard to look into the glare as it is to look with the glare. You always want the sun on your back, you're moving away from the sun. A good speed to look for sight fish at. Personally, I like to go slower because it allows me to see fish that I've missed. Now, there are some guys that like to go 10, 12 knots and just cruise right along. I've done that before. I've missed fish that way before because I've run them right over. If I'm going slower and a fish pops up 30 foot off my bow or 20 foot off my bow swimming right at me, I can quick throw it neutral, give me a chance to spike a bucktail down right in front of his face, and still have a chance to catch that fish.
Yeah, sometimes I think the sound of the boat coming or going is what raises the fish. And so you're right. If you're going too fast, if you've raised them within your general area vicinity, they pop up right off your bow, and then you missed them. So, it's you got to trial and error your way to your trolling speed because you have to be able to react fast if they pop up close to you. So what are some of your favorite areas to sight cast in?
That's based off the season as well. So early season, I find myself being south or west. So early season, I find myself going up and down the York River entrance channel. There are a lot of popular spots. Everybody likes to fish the CY, where the Baltimore Channel and the York Channel meet and they split off.
Right. So he's talking about the CY buoy. It's right there. That's the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel. There's the Chesapeake Channel, and it splits into these two channels here. So right there is where it splits is the CY buoy. You see a lot of people running up and down right in here, sight casting. But
absolutely. One of my other favorite spots is actually when you're over here. This is the York Channel right here, as Mike just so kindly pointed out for us. Bluefish Rock is a great area to sight cast early season for me. And when I'm starting my day, in the summer months, believe it or not, my boat is actually kept in Crown Point Marina until about middle of July before I find myself moving up. And that's over here in Gloucester Point. When I leave out, my first area that I look is around the York Spit area. And I'll zigzag back and forth across the channel until I get down to this CY area. And then I find myself heading over here in this general area, anywhere along this north channel, which is on the backside of the high rise, and just fishing up and down in this shallow water. And a lot of people seem to forget that cobia they have tails. They don't just constantly stay in the deep water. I find just as many cobia in the shallow water as I do as the channel edges. And that's something that I think other people should, don't be afraid to go outside of what's popular, explore, go to the shallow waters. I've caught a lot of cobia this year, and even some larger ones in that 9 to 20 foot range. And that inner channel ledge, so you can see right here, it goes from about 18 foot to about 30 foot. The closer you get to the channel, it goes from about 30 foot to close to 60 foot. I mean, there are even parts over here where it gets to be about 120 to 130 foot deep. There's one little deep pocket in the Chesapeake Bay that, I've been there before, and I don't really see many fish around there. Now, there are a lot of people that do. But it's just, I think that's too deep. My favorite spot to me is between 40 and 60 foot. I find most of my fish in that range.
One of the places I want to try this year is Cabbage Patch Reef. Because it's never been a lot of structure there before, but just last year, they took the remnants of Leicester Bridge, which is right here. They wrote into the contract that to dump all the material from the old Leicester Bridge and dump it on Cabbage Patch. So Cabbage Patch now has a significant amount of new structure on there. And so I'm just interested to see if that's going to...
They put a new buoy on that? Because I couldn't find that last year.
There was last year. Sometimes these buoys get blown off.
Right.
Like the Bluefish Rock Reef buoy is gone. I don't know if they've replaced that yet, but they get blown away and they don't have the money to replace them. But but sometimes they're hanging on the reefs too. But that's a lot of new structure there.
Right. But just to touch back, there's a lot of good places to sight fish at. You'll notice where there's a lot of boats, you'll notice a lot of fish pressure. You'll see a lot of fish pop up, keep coming around in circles. And you may notice they get a little bit of lockjaw syndrome. I'm a big believer in fishing away from the pack a little bit, just not too far enough away where if they're in them and they're all biting, you can get back to them no problem. But just far enough outside to where if I do see that fish, he's less prone to be skittish and more prone to chew what I have to offer.
Okay. So if you're out there sight casting and you see a guy anchored chumming, don't roll up on his chum slick and try to pull a fish off of his chum slick. So just run, just steer away from him.
If you can help it, go off his bow.
You're gonna make that chummer mad if you roll in too close to him.
You can help it, go off his bow. His chum slick, you'll notice on the surface of the water looks like a sheen, like an oil sheen. Someone dropped gas in the water or dropped oil in the water.
All right, so tell me, you're out there, you're in your tower.
Okay.
You're rolling along, you got the sun at your back. Tell me a little bit about your details about kind of what you're looking for, if you see a fish, how you position the boat, and the best kind of casting for And talk about bucktails and
Sure.
live bait too.
So if I'm out there when normally my sight casting operation is myself, my mate, and there are those customers that for me in my charter business that like to get up there and we only do one at a time, safety issue. But we try to give everybody the full opportunity and the full experience to be able to see their own fish. And if they want to throw at their own fish, I'll give them a rod and tell them, hey, throw that right there at that fish. You see them swimming this way, throw it over here. But when we're looking, and my mate and I are starting our day, and we're looking for fish on the surface of the water, I normally we keep it as like the directions of the clock. So my bow is 12 o'clock, my stern is 6 o'clock, and my port is 9, my starboard is 3. I will cover from 6 to 12, and he will cover from 12 to 6. And we try not to look too far away. We always try to keep the glare on our back as best as we can. But there are some days where it's a little rough and we're not able to do that. So we try to quarter the glare. This is the direction of the waves. We just try to make sure we're going where it's safest for everybody. But when I'm looking, our look patterns, we try not to look further than anywhere from 50 to 60 foot off the boat, especially when there's a lot of glare. Even when there's glare, 20 to 30 foot most. Zigzag, look a left-right pattern, in and out, constantly scanning. Don't ever try to look down at your phone. I keep my phone on speaker at all times. If somebody calls me, it's on a magnet and it's on speaker. So I'm always constantly looking and still being able to talk on the phone. I go left to right. I go up and down. A lot of people like an M shape or a W shape. It's all personal preference. I'm a left to right kind of guy and looking down and up as I'm going left to right.
All right, so you're rolling along and you see a fish out there. Do you take the boat out of gear? Do you slow down, or do you try to how do you get in position to get the best cast off?
Well, it depends. If I see a fish, let's play scenario here. If I see a fish and he's coming straight at me and he's a good 50, 60 foot away, the first thing I do is put the boat right in neutral. Take off the throttle, put it in neutral, grab the first rod that I have next to me. My first instinct is always to try to grab the live bait rod. It's right there, it's ready, why not use it? I'll try to throw that rod at that fish. If he's swimming at me, I want to keep it about anywhere from 5 to 7 foot in front of him, far enough away to where it doesn't spook him, but close enough to where he sees it. Let that live bait hit the water, keep the bail in free spool, no pressure on the line whatsoever, just let that bait go. If that fish sees that bait, looks at it, and doesn't follow it, my first mate follows it up with a bucktail. If he's swimming at me, I try to keep him right in front of me, swimming directly at me. If he's swimming away from me, I try to keep it right behind him because I want to be able to throw it in front of him, not have it hit his back. But I still want to throw it a good 5 to 10 foot in front of him and rip it back right by him as fast as I can. Get his attention, but don't spook him.
Are you fishing when you're live baiting? Are you circle hooks or like J hooks?
I'm a J hook guy when it comes to sight casting for live baits. Specifically, that's just something for me because I like to be able to see my fish eat it. I like to be able to see where that hook is in his mouth as he's swimming by, and I like to be able to stick him so that way that I know that I've got a good hook set in him.
Okay.
I've noticed I've pulled hooks that are circle hooks sight casting before. I've also caught big fish on circle hooks before. But personally, I'm a J hook guy for sight fishing.
So for your chumming, you like the circle.
Correct.
But the sight casting, you like the J's.
Absolutely.
Just like most bucktails are J's too. So how do you make the decision when you see a fish and you've got like your live bait and you've got your bucktail? How do you decide which one you're going to throw? Or is that just you just got to learn that by instinct? Or?
You know what? There are a lot of people. The first thing they do is reach for the hook, reach for the bucktail. There are a lot of people that reach for the eel. To me, I look at a fish and I see the way he's swimming along. If he's really lazy, just swimming on the surface of the water, my instinct is going to be to grab the live bait and try to position it perfect. Because a live bait isn't as easy to cast as a bucktail. And eels sometimes, especially when they're smaller, can get caught in the wind and you make a bad cast and they'll never see it.
That's right.
So it's like a free redo. Reposition your boat, get yourself right, to where if that fish is swimming from my left to my right, I want to leave that fish. I want to land it in the water, especially with a live bait. I want to land it perfectly in his line of sight, if I can. No more than 10 foot away, but no closer than 5 foot to the nose of that fish. Close enough to where he can see it, far enough to where it doesn't spook him.
Yeah, it's always a tough when you have live bait and you're trolling against the wind. The wind's at your face, because you really can't sling an eel very far. against the wind a lot of times. So sometimes you're forced to use the bucktail. I like to if I know it's kind of under 40 or questionable, I always throw them a bucktail.
Absolutely.
Just because sometimes even a small cobia just is not going to eat a medium-sized eel. It's not a big fish.
And that's another important factor. You know, the size of the fish is definitely a key determinant. You know, if I'm using if it's a small fish and customers just want to catch it, it's the first fish of the day, he's mid-30s inches. My first instinct is grab the bucktail, pitch it out there, hook the fish up, if we can.
Anything else about sight casting you want to throw out there?
You know, there are certain lures that work better than others, I think. Certain colors that work better certain times of year. I think those are important to note. One of my favorite lures is for those at home that can't see it. This is made by Bill Gorham at Boat Up Lures, and it is a green, he calls this his octo head. It is green and orange, and to me this is a great midsummer to late spring bait. Very long. It's an artificial silicone skirt, so if you can tell, it pulses when it's in the water. Now, when you're working your bait through the water, you want to be sure to make sure you keep it enough to where that fast enough to where that fish doesn't get bored of it. I'm a big believer in rip it by his nose, keep it moving fast, and as he comes up on it, speed it up even more, because you'll notice he'll follow it and then he'll get angry. To me, I think a cobia bites not just off of hunger, he bites off of anger that he can't have something, especially when it comes to a bucktail. So the faster you move that bait away from that fish, the more he's going to be prone to bite that hook and not care what happens.
Right. Yeah, a question here. Do you ever like throw a croaker or a spot?
Absolutely.
While sight casting?
I do throw a croaker or spot. If I notice that day that eels aren't working, because sometimes your eels, if you don't keep them chilled enough, will get lethargic. One thing that's important to note about cobia is they love a spry, live bait. They want one that's going to, as soon as it hits the water, try to get away from them because they know what's happening. Yeah. My croaker, I try, you make the rock on symbol right here, or the Rastafari man symbol. I try not to have my croaker or my spot any bigger than that. Bigger than about 4 or 5 inches at most.
Yeah, I found that a croaker will live a lot longer and be more spry longer, and a spot is a little more fragile. So if the spot's been in your bucket too long, he may be not as lively. But a croaker, man, he'll live forever and always be lively up to a point.
When you do throw those live baits out there, it's important to note how you hook your eel with using whatever kind of hook you use. My favorite way to hook an eel is through his bottom jaw, through his upper jaw, and out his eyeball.
Yep.
It allows you to get a little bit more oomph behind the cast, a little bit extra effort,
and stay on better through the eyeball.
It stays on better when it goes through the eyeball. Yeah. Now it does kill your bait a little faster, especially with an eel. With croaker, I like to hook them in the back, above the spine. A personal thing that I do is a croaker is a very hard fish. So one of my things that I have done in the past is I've taken a pair of scissors and the point on the end of each of his gills, trimmed them off, and his dorsal fin on top, trimmed that down to where it's almost flush to the back. That allows them to not just steer and swim straight. What it does is when I trim that fin off the top, it's like when you live bait a Pokorny for stripers up in Montauk. You clip that fin, he'll swim in circles. He won't be able to swim and get away this way or get away that way. He'll swim in circles so that cobia can time it and line up and smack it.
Yeah, I personally found that sometimes they'll thumb their nose at eels, even a lively eel, but they almost never thumb their nose at a lively croaker. They'll almost always go after a croaker, as long as he's swimming good. If he's just lays on the side, he ain't gonna touch it. But if he's out there swimming around, and the cobia sees it, he's going after that croaker.
Absolutely.
Whereas they'll sometimes just I've seen 20 eels today, I'm not eating that today.
And there are those smart fish out there that have seen those eels and they know that there's a hook attached to it and they're just not going to touch it. I don't care how spry or how lively that eel is. He's seen it. He knows what it is. Moving on. He doesn't care.
We got a question about tackle. Sure. I'm gonna start with my favorite rod. This is John Bishop made this for me at Bishop's Tackle. This is a Saragossa 8000, 65-pound braid on here. and it's an 8-foot Terramar rod. And if you really want to know, because this has been my absolute favorite, it's a Terramar TMS X80 XH. So it's an 8-foot rod, and they call it the action is called extra fast because it has this really sensitive tip to it, but it's got a lot of backbone. We can handle a big fish. But an 8-foot rod, I could sling an eel a country mile on this thing. And so this is 65-pound braid, and this is just 80-pound mono on here, and just different ways to connect the leader on here. But my favorite way, and you can Google this, it's called the FG knot. If you can see how tight that knot is, it's called the FG knot on there. And that FG knot is the slimmest knot out there. It's got a little fray on the end of it. I got to redo the knot. But this knot's not going anywhere. It's a 100% knot. It'll never slip. That knot, if you tie it right, that knot on there will never slip. And there's nothing to hang up on the guides. So just Google the FG knot. I personally like a Snell J-hook, about an 8-aught owner or Gamakatsu. I like to let that cobia just get it in his gut, eat it for a long time, and then load him up. But that's it's personal preference. Different captains do different things, and there's not one way to fish. Well, so we've been talking for 40 minutes.
Okay.
What I want to do is kind of see if there's questions from anyone listening, and maybe we can just answer questions. And so one of the questions is, do you like to tail hook the croaker through the jaw or through the back? I think you already said jaw or through the back.
I'm a big fan of any fishing, or whether you're throwing a live bait to a mahi or a sailfish, or you're throwing a live bait to a cobia, especially when it comes to a fish. I like to go above the spine, right about the middle of the back. To me, it's the most meat to throw that fish. Now, when you're chumming, when I'm chumming, I like to tail hook a croaker. I also like to tail hook an eel. But when I'm sight casting, my biggest thing is to hook him in the biggest, meatiest part of the back, and just make sure that I don't hook him right in the spine. Just get it out there, and it allows me to get the most oomph behind that cast and not have a risk of pulling him off.
All right. Well, while anyone's thinking about questions, I do want to cover another point about your license. Obviously, everybody knows you gotta have a fishing license, but in addition to the fishing license, you have to have a Cobia permit now for your boat. So the boat captain has to have a Cobia permit. It's free, but with that Cobia permit comes mandatory reporting. So you not only have to have the permit, you have to mandatorily report, because our issue in Virginia is that the MRIB numbers are just crap. We don't trust them. We don't believe in them. So the only way to combat that is to have better data that the state collects. And so even if you don't like to report, I would encourage all anglers to, doesn't take much. You go online, the VMRC page, with your permit number, and you go on to their Saltwater Journal webpage, and you just enter in what you caught or didn't catch for the trips. You don't got to do it every day, but just every once in a while go on there and report your catches. And that's going to help VMRC and the state of Virginia, that when these MRIP numbers come out, we have some other data to come back and say, look, hold on, guys. You guys are on dope. You think we caught that many fish. And so it's more. So just remember, you have to do that. And so what VMRC is going to do, we think this year, is that if you get a permit and you don't report by the end of the season, because you have a requirement to, even if you didn't fish or didn't even catch one cobia, you have a requirement to report that you didn't catch any fish. And so you have to even report that you didn't catch anything. So they're saying this year, if you did not report at all and you had a permit, you're probably not going to get a permit next year. So don't ruin yourself by not reporting your catches. So the question is, can you get a permit after you catch a cobia or before? Well,
it's best to have your permit before you even go cobia fishing at all. I did see VMRC out there last year a frequent amount of times. They actually asked me 3 different times, even as a charter captain, all we want to see is your cobia permit. and they wanted to look for that specifically.
I mean, I guess technically speaking, that if you caught one and you really weren't even cobia fishing, a lot of people are out drum fishing and they catch a cobia. Heck, they even people out flounder fishing and they hook a cobia on their flounder rod. Then yeah, if you intend to keep it, yeah, just jump online or call it in and get one real quick, so you don't get caught out there with no permit.
No early fish have been caught yet. None that I am well aware of. I think the earliest I've heard of is somebody in Georgia caught one last week. Definitely the Panhandle in Florida has been getting lit up all week.
We're talking about reporting. So how about report early on no fish caught? So yeah, I mean, you could. No, what they're saying is if you've been fishing like it's July, now it's August, or even the beginning part of September, and you haven't caught a fish yet, you don't got to report. But if you go the entire season and the season ends on 30 September or 15 September, whatever our date is, and you have not did not catch any report, then you're probably not going to get your permit next year.
You definitely need to submit at least the report that he was talking about, saying, no activity. So even if you did go fish, or you submit the report saying, I went fishing a bunch, but I never caught one. They just want to see that you're making the effort to do such things, so you can keep your permit.
So you got a question about sunglasses.
My favorite brands are Costas and Wiley X's. Smith Optics is another good brand. I just haven't found one that I've liked yet.
What's your favorite color? I mean, you like the amber, the green?
It depends on the day. So if I'm on a cloudy day, I like a yellow lens with a chrome reflection on it. Lights everything up. On a sunny day, my favorite thing, because the Chesapeake Bay is shallower, is a green lens with an amber base. You can find that, you're golden. Now, a lot of coastal lenses nowadays are made with copper base. I used one of them last year. Worked out fine. Saw just as many fish. But the goal is to have plastic or glass, doesn't matter. That green reflection on the outside of your lens is very important.
So a question from John Bello is, on your bucktail, how many ounces do you like? What's your favorite? These are 2, I think.
Yeah, a lot of these are 2 ounces. That one might even be 1.5. One of my favorite, sure, you can go ahead.
Boat up lures, at least mine are about 2 ounces. But
yeah, it depends. For me, my preference is a 1.5 ounce because it does slow that fall down just a little bit, but it still gives me enough weight to get it out there wherever I need to. You can't cast a 1.5 ounce weight, a good 30, 40. I mean, you should be able to cast whatever you need, at least a good 30, 40 foot, and call it a day. 1.5 ounce is my favorite size head.
So a question from Brent. He's asking about sight casting when it's cloudy, or do you just go chumming, or do you even try when it's cloudy?
It's a tough call to make, and it's something that you kind of got to do the morning of. You got to look at the clouds. If it's complete overcast and it's going to be that way all day, normally your best bet is chumming. However, if it's late in the season, a lot of fish like to congregate on buoys or structure. So on cloudy days, you may not be sight fishing, you may just be buoy hopping and jigging up and down off the buoys. And you can do that when it's cloudy. You can do that year round. And the fish don't tend to congregate on the buoys early season. But if you're even in a boat without a tower and you've been chumming all day and it's middle of July, you want to go, let's try it. Go pull up to the first buoy you see, normally the main channel buoys like the York River Entrance Channel or the Baltimore Channel, and just jig those areas. Just drop it down, try to take your bait and either throw it from behind the buoy, above the buoy, and let it drift back down, or stay above the buoy and flip it out behind the boat and have someone keep the boat in gear so that way you don't, A, get caught in the buoy and break yourself off, but B, you can see what's going on.
Yeah, the interesting thing about buoys I found is just because you don't see a cobia on that buoy doesn't mean he's not there down deep or somewhere. So if you're close to a buoy, just throw it in the buoy and let it sink. Heck, all the way to the bottom if the current's not ripping, and then just start ripping that jig, and you'd be surprised how many cobia you'll catch just blind casting on a buoy.
Brent, to answer the second part of your question, the time in the morning that I start looking, I try not to look any time before about 8 o'clock. I like to let that sun get up just a little bit, get that real early morning glare off that water. There are days where I'll go chumming for 2-3 hours. You know, I'll get out. I'll leave the dock at 6, chum from 7 to 10, and sight cast from 11 to 3, and come home. And there are people that like to do those trips because it gives you that early morning bite, and then it allows me to go have time to go around and find that bigger fish on the surface if we haven't caught one already.
Yep. I like to be at anchor chumming at sunrise. And then when that sun gets up high, then I'll switch over to sight casting, personally. So we've been talking now for 50 minutes now. We're going to try to wrap up. So if you guys are looking to book a charter around the Mathews, Gloucester area, Captain Cole is one of your go-to guys. Give him a call. He'll give us your contact information and website.
Absolutely. My website is currently under construction as we speak. It will be done by the end of this week. But the address is www.bigdealsportfishing.com. And my phone number is 757-645-8478. And my email address is bigdealsportfishing@gmail.com.
All right. So Big Deal Fishing. And so he doesn't just fish for cobia. I've seen his posts. This guy will put you on the striped bass. One of the things that'll fill your coolers is croaker and spot too. He's got some good spots for that too. So even if you don't like to do cobia fishing, hit him up for striped bass when they're here, when the season's open, and just to fill the cooler, man. Sometimes just a cooler full of croaker and spot is kind of what you need for the day, just to have a good day, because that puts a rod in everybody's hands and everybody's catching pretty much all day. That's a fun trip too. I like, people dismiss just go out and fill the coolers with croaker fishing, but that's one of my favorite trips, believe it or not.
And even when the spots get running right, and they're about anywhere from 8 to 10 inches long, you know, you get those nice 2 at a time spot. They dig back to the bottom like a flounder does. They fight hard.
And especially for kids, man.
Oh yeah.
Kids, you put a rod in their hand, they start catching, man. That really gets your children hooked on fishing, and that's really what it's all about. I do want to put a plug out for VSSA, my organization, the Virginia Saltwater Sport Fishing Association. I would encourage you to go to our webpage at joinvssa.org. Take a look around our webpage, see what we've been up to. If you like what we're doing and support us, please join. It's only $25 per year, and we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Whatever you donate, contribute to us, it's tax deductible. You can write it off on your taxes. And so the more members we have, the stronger we are as we go around to these meetings and represent you, the angler, at these meetings. So I'd like to thank Captain Cole for coming out to us.
Thank you, Captain. I appreciate it.
And helping us out and talking about cobia. It's got me excited now. I'm ready for some warm weather. We got to get through this last potential front that rolls in tomorrow. More snow. I hope it doesn't snow. So anyways, guys, thanks for joining in, and we'll see you again soon. And thanks, Captain Cole.
Sounds good.
Appreciate it.
Captain Mike. I appreciate it.